So our next speaker is Judd Kessler. Judd is an assistant professor in the Business Economics and Policy group at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Judd has worked on a number of topics, from organ donation to understanding what the motives for why people contribute. He's done some excellent work on understanding alumni giving, work that he's done through the University of Pennsylvania. Judd is just, I enjoy reading Judd's work when it comes out, talking with Judd. Again, his insights have shaped the way that I think about this problem. We're honored to have him here. And an interesting fact about Judd that is on his bio: in 2012, Forbes magazine named him one of the 30 under 30 in law and policy. So with that, we'll turn it over to Judd. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction and reminding me that I used to be young. I want to, sorry about the scheduling change. I'm very pleased, though, to be following both John's comments this morning, because this talk is going to deal with the heterogeneity that he was talking about. And then, of course, very pleased to be following Jim, because the topics are very well connected. It's also, my paper's also about trying to understand what motivates the rich to give and how the rich differ from the poor. It's also nice to follow Jim, because both literally and figuratively, as lots of his work has motivated lots of people of my generation who are interested in thinking about charitable giving and what motivates it. So Jim also did a lot of the work for me to motivate why understanding the rich and the decisions of the rich with regard to charitable giving is so important. We all know why charitable giving is important, and that most households are giving to charity, and representing the biggest share of the money donated to charity is coming from these households. And Jim alluded to the fact that high-income households are actually donating a smaller percent of their income, interestingly, all the way up to the wealthiest on the Forbes list. And so we worry about this not just because we want to understand what motivates the rich to give relative to the poor, but we also understand that the rich have the deepest pockets and can be developed into these very large donors. And so, this is not just something that we don't understand from an academic point of view, but it's also a missed opportunity when we think about the good that this money could be doing if allocated the right way. So it was very nice to hear Jim say this himself, because when we cite the impressive literature on charitable giving, we also cite him, and he said, we don't really know all that much about the rich and what motivates the rich. And that dearth of insight that motivated him motivated us to answer this question. Some of the images that he showed about previous literature on giving of the rich, I'll talk very briefly about, but as he mentioned, they're mostly lab studies. So subjects are brought into the lab, induced made to feel rich, or asked about how they consider themselves. Are they high socioeconomic status or low socioeconomic status? And the findings are generally that people who identify as high socioeconomic status give less or are less helpful. If you prime people to think about themselves as high socioeconomic status, and you generally do that by asking them to think about themselves relative to people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder in the US, or you prime people to think of themselves as not as well off by asking them to compare themselves to people at the top of the ladder. That manipulation can lead people who are made to think of themselves as rich to give less and help less. And priming people to think of themselves as poor can actually sort of have the opposite effect. So there's something about not just being rich, but being made to feel rich that affects giving behavior, at least in the laboratory. This is connected to a broader literature that suggests that thinking about money at all can have similar effects. So this is a lab study, numerous lab studies in this paper by Vos et al. They prime people to think about money either by having them do a word scramble where you're finding words. The words that you're finding in one condition are words about money, and in the other condition are just neutral words. So that's one way to prime people to think about money. Or, this was one of my favorites, giving monopoly money out to people, either a lot or a little or none. And you're priming people to think about money before they make decisions, and the decisions are constructed to try to be separate from the study. So the prime happens, and then sometimes they debrief the subject and say, the study's over, now you're free to go. But what they want to know is, as the subject's leaving, will they help a confederate of the experimenter who drops a box of pencils? How many pencils will they stand there and help the person pick up? Or in the most relevant example for us, there's a box they've been paid in quarters, and there's a change jar to collect money for charity. How many of the quarters do they drop into the change jar? And what the research finds is these people primed to think about money, who get their monopoly money or find the monetary words in the scramble, they give less. Right? So we have this phenomenon that we're observing in the lab, that people thinking about money or made to feel rich are giving less. And the motivation for thinking about these psychological phenomena and how they relate to the rich, one thing you might want to do is say, can we understand what is motivating the rich? And can we use the same psychological phenomenon that's getting them to give less and try to turn it on its head, use that phenomenon to get them to give more? And so is there a way to leverage the fact that the rich behave in this way to induce more giving, rather than what we see in practice, which is that often they're giving less? So the thing that we're going to look at and see if it can be a driver for the rich is what we call agency. So the idea is that sort of in lots of settings, not just in giving, but individuals care about having a sense of agency in their actions, that they don't just care about the outcomes, they care that they were able to make the outcome come to be. And so there's literature on this, training that gives sex workers a feeling of agency and control over their lives, leads them to have better savings decisions and health outcomes. When you, in a laboratory setting, ask subjects what they would like tax money to go for, so in the study by Lamberton et al., it's a lab tax. 30% is going to be taken from your earnings. And you get, in one condition, you get to choose how should that money be used: snacks for the lab, drinks for the lab, more incentives for lab participants. When you ask people to voice their opinion, it's non-binding, but just to say what is it that you think the money should go for, subjects are less likely to withhold their earnings and more likely to pay the tax, and they feel better about the tax when given a voice, a sense of agency about what the money goes for. This is linked to findings that we have from neural work that says the pleasure centers of the brain light up when you have the option to give money to somebody and you do it, rather than if the experimenter forces you to give money. So agency is this powerful force. People like to feel agency. When they feel agency, they behave differently, maybe more generously, more likely to pay a tax. Right? And so this is the lever that we think might help us turn these rich folks who are not giving as much into bigger donors, because wealth is associated with feelings of independence and autonomy, as identified in these previous lab studies. And agency triggers those feelings and might make the rich say, yes, I'm going to give more when I feel like I have a voice in it, because I'm an independent, autonomous person. I've earned my money. I should have a say in how it's spent, right? And so maybe an agentic appeal will have be more successful at getting the rich to give. There's some lab evidence that's suggestive of this. So Willens et al. Find that rich are more likely to respond to these kinds of agentic appeals, and so they're the kind of appeal differences that they're thinking about. Let's save a life together, here's how, would be sort of the generic appeal. But you as a lifesaver, like the sound of that, that's the agentic appeal. It's you're the one who's doing the life saving. And they find that latter message is more effective among the donors in their lab who they identify as rich. All right, so what are we going to do? Michael said we have this is joint work with Catherine Milkman and Yue Zhang. We have a relationship with the Penn Fund, the organization at the University of Pennsylvania that it collects from its alumni. And we ran an experiment with 32,000, almost 33,000 alumni of University of Pennsylvania. It was a warm list, so 81% of the people had given to UPenn, but not all that recently. And overall, across the conditions, the two conditions I'll show you, we had a response rate of about 2%. So not their best appeal, not to the most loyal donor base, but to a donor base that wasn't a cold list. What did the intervention look like? So the standard, the control group reply card, which half the subjects, half the potential donors received, looked like this. It had sort of the normal information to options to different ways to give. It based on what they knew about the donors, it varied what the suggested amounts were. Of course, the addresses were different per the different subjects. And then I want you to focus on the left side. Okay, so this is what we're going to vary. In the control group, the left side of the reply card said, annual alumni giving through the Penn Fund directly supports these priorities of undergraduate education. And it listed 4 with these check boxes next to them: student financial aid, student and academic life, residential life, and special campus initiatives. All right, so this is what the control group received. The randomly selected treatment group received what we call the agency condition. And the text, the blue text is the same. And then there's this added bit, tell us which is the most important to you, with the checked box and a little pencil. It says, please check one box. And the 4 priorities are listed there without the checks. And so the potential donors prompted to make the check themselves. Now, this is totally non-binding. Notice nothing in this appeal says that we're going to earmark the funds. That wasn't done. There's nothing explicitly binding about this, but it indicates that UPenn wants to understand what the interests are of the potential donor pool. And so the question is this kind of intervention that gives the donor a sense of agency, gives them a voice in what the funds are going for, is this going to affect the donor pool, and is it going to affect the rich? So how are we going to identify people as rich? So we had some limitations. Even though the partnership with the Penn Fund is great, they said, look, we're not going to give you the full address. We couldn't do the Zillow thing that Jim recommended to identify wealth. What we'll give you is we'll give you the zip code, and there's lots of good information associated with the zip code. And so what we're going to do is we're going to classify as rich people who live in the richest zip codes among the subjects in our data. And so one of the classifications, the main one I'll show you lots of results for, is the top 1%. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at all of the people that got mailed this appeal. We're going to look at their zip codes. We're going to rank the zip codes by median household income. And we're going to look at the top 1% by median household income. And that's going to be people who live in zip codes where that median is $190,000 or more. So we can't guarantee that everybody that lives in those zip codes is super rich, okay? But it's going to be, if the median is 190,000, we think the mean is probably going to be much higher, and we might expect the richest folks to be living there. Since it's not perfect, we're going to do other classifications to try to figure out who's different ways of classifying people as rich. We're going to do the same exercise, but look at the top 5% of subjects in our data. That'll have a cutoff in the median household income of $155,000. Another way we'll do it is to say, forget about our data. Let's just look across the entire U.S. What's the 1%, top 1% of the richest zip codes across the U.S.? That'll give us a cutoff of $196,000. I'll show you results for those 3 different rules. Where are the richest zip codes in our data? So I'll show you a couple maps. Here is the New York metropolitan area. Any area that's white reflects a zip code that's not in our data. So no one from that zip code was mailed a letter as part of the campaign. Anything in gray are zip codes that were in our data but not ever classified as being rich, or very rich in this case. And then the dark blue is the top 1% classification, and the light blue is top 5 but not top 1. So if you know the New York metropolitan area, you can sort of get a sense of where the dark and light blue are, so the fancy suburbs. If you're more familiar with DC, this is where the richest zip codes are, and here's San Francisco. Okay, so what are our subjects? What's the breakdown of our subjects? So we don't know exactly their wealth, but we do know a good deal about them. So this first two columns are all the donors, and then I'll show you the top 5% and 1% based on the classifications within our data. All right, and so the things to notice is that it's about 30 years since graduation for these folks, and that's an average. So we're going to have people who've been out a long time and younger donors. You can see get a sense of the demographic breakdown, and just I said about 82% of people had given in the past, and it's relatively consistent across the groups. All right, I said average giving rate is around 2%, and what I want to show you now is I'm going to start to show you some of the results, and again, as John mentioned in the beginning, this is really an exercise in heterogeneity. We want to know, how does this intervention work? And we want to look at different groups and say, how does it look for the poor and how does it look for the rich? Let me tell you what the control group giving looks like in those groups. So if you look at average donation among all subjects in the control group, it's about $5.80. The richest 1% are giving on average $6.55. Conditional on making a gift, the average donation among everybody is $2.32, and the average donation among the top 1% is slightly less. And that the reason for that is that the rich are giving at a slightly higher rate. Okay, but this is consistent with this. The rich are richer, or at least we identify them as being richer. So to the extent that we're thinking about giving as a percentage of income or as a percentage of wealth, the fact that the amounts are the same is not all that exciting. How do these groups, the richest 1% and the rest of us, how do they respond to the agency appeal? They respond quite dramatically. So what you're seeing here on the left is the percent change in amount donated. And the bottom 99%, we're seeing no effect. The bars are 95% confidence intervals. And so we're seeing no effect. It's directionally positive. So the Penn Fund didn't have to worry that this kind of appeal was going to really harm donations from everybody else. It's a zero, but at least directionally positive. And then when you focus in on this top 1%, you're seeing a big increase in giving. So you're going from, we said, an average of about $6 to an average of about $30. Conditional on making a donation, you're going from something on the order of $200 to something on the order of $800 to $900. So I'm going to show you some tables that make statistical claims about this, and as I said, I want to classify rich in different ways. I want to show you that the finding is robust to that. I also want to show you something important when we do analysis thinking specifically about the rich. I want to show you that the result is robust to trimming donations. Trimming the biggest donations. You might be worried when you see this that, oh yeah, the rich had someone, they gave $1 million, that's going to drive the whole effect. So I'm going to show that the effect persists even as I restrict the biggest gifts to be smaller and smaller amounts. Okay, so I'll show you a few tables that look like this. The stars, as Jim mentioned, show that the effect is significantly different than zero. And what this shows you here, the effect of being in the top 1% is not increasing giving by all that much. The average giving is increasing by less than 80 cents. The agency appeal, the second row, this is what is the effect of the agency appeal on the people who are not in the top 1%. And this is that directionally positive but not significant effect. It's also about 80 cents on average, but basically zero. And then what's the effect, this is in dollars, of being in the agency condition if you're also the top 1%, and that's the $24 difference I mentioned before. What we do in this table is we add additional controls. This is a useful exercise to do to say, is there something, did the randomization not work perfectly? Let's add some controls and make sure that the differences are not actually due to something else. rather than our agency condition. And importantly, the effect doesn't change at all as we add additional controls. I told you we want to look at the effect with these different cutoffs for what the largest gift is allowed to be. There's a process called Windsorization. We take any gift above some threshold gift and we say, all right, that person gave $10,000, but let's not call it $10,000. Let's do the analysis as if it's the 99th percentile of gifts, or in this case, $2,000, and look for the effect then. And so again, you want to focus on this third row here. When we do the 99th percentile, which is $2,000, the effect is still significant. When we do the 95th percentile, so we're trimming now down to 1,000, the effect is still significant. And when we trim to the 90th percentile, so this is trimming below the average donation of the people in the treatment group, so we're taking away a lot of the effect we're being conservative here, we still see a large significant effect that's on the order of 150% of the control levels. So we don't think this result is being driven by a few big donors. We think it's a more widespread effect. I said I want to show you the effect by different classifications of rich. Okay, so this is the same effect for the top 5%. I'm showing it to you on the same scale as the original result. So it's the same 700% as the top. So this looks smaller. It's still quite large. It's in the 100 to 150% increase category, but notice that it is much smaller than the 1% effect, or the effect on just the 1%. So already you can see that this effect is still there looking at this wider classification, but it's not as strong. This suggests this is really is about the richest of the rich in our data, rather than something more widespread at the top of the distribution. Here's the statistical analysis of that 5% group again. Significant. Here's the classification of where we say, let's look at the richest 5% of households across the entire US based on this criteria. Of the subjects in our sample that hit that classification, we're still seeing significant effects. So in summary, the rich are responding to this agentic appeal that's asking them to tell the Penn Fund something about their preferences surrounding donation. I should point out that the probability of donation is not affected by this intervention. All of the average effects that you saw were driven by average donations conditional on a donation being made. And so that's why the gifts are going up from 200 to about 800, 900. Meanwhile, we see no effect on the non-rich. It's importantly for the Penn Fund, it's not hurting their giving. And I wanted to make sure that the effect was robust to different definitions, adding controls, eliminating these outliers, and it is. So what are the implications for practice? The direct takeaway is that if you have rich people in your donor pool that you want to target, you might want to think about how your appeals, particularly for them, might be better targeted to give them a sense of agency. You can either do something similar to what we did or think of other creative ways, ask them to write a sentence at the bottom of the reply card about what they think the Penn Fund or whatever organization should be working on. The point that John made about heterogeneity is very true in charitable giving. Being able to identify which groups are going to be best affected by which appeals is going to be incredibly valuable to increase donation rates and donation amounts. This appeal worked great for the top 1%, and 99% of the people in this study got an intervention that had no effect. So next time we run an intervention, maybe the top 1% get something like this, and the bottom 99, we try something else that might increase giving. Another takeaway, another implication is that we should be excited by the fact that the rich are giving at lower rates because there's an opportunity to induce them to give more. There are ways of getting them to be more generous through even something as simple as a direct mail appeal. And I think importantly, as we think about developing the kinds of big donors that Jim was talking about, giving $25 million or more, right, this effect that agency appears to be so important in influencing donations from this group lends some empirical support to this notion that the way to approach these donors about making these large gifts is to spend a lot of time talking with them about what their vision is for the institution, where do they think their dollars would be most useful for, that exercise triggers this sense of agency in a way that can be very powerful. Thank you. I think I have to go with John first, yeah. Yeah,
it's my party, right?
yeah, hey.
Sounds excellent.
Thank you.
Really neat study. Quick question about, are the rich just simply shifting the gifts through time? You probably have these folks after your experiment for a number of months. If you looked at that, and how much of this is actually increasing the giving pool versus intertemporal substitution?
It's a great question. So this is one of the nice things about having an ongoing relationship with the organization. So it's not something that we've done yet, but we have regular data transfer with them and can look at that as time goes on. One thing that we have observed in other interventions with the Penn Fund, we did a study analyzing their consecutive giving donation programs. And they introduced these programs where you get stars next to your name in the honor roll if you have given three years in a row to the Penn Fund. And we've seen in settings like that with this population that those interventions are successful. People are more likely to give. They give more on average. And in fact, it appears to crowd in donations. In this case, we looked at donations to non-Penn Fund, but other priorities at the University of Pennsylvania, and we saw that increased giving in this year also led to more giving to the university through these other channels that were not eligible for recognition. So it's a great question and something that we think about a lot and can look at with the Penn Fund data. We don't know yet for this group, but the evidence that we have from the Penn Fund, it suggests that these donors, when they give, it doesn't immediately crowd out some other donation that they might. So that's my guess about what we'll see. Yeah.
The study that you ran, was it the appeals were solely for direct mail?
Yes. So the appeal card that you saw came with a generic sort of letter about the Penn Fund that was the same for everybody, and that was the appeal. There was no other communication.
Do you think that the effect you found bipolar via online giving?
Yeah, I mean the agentic appeal, I mean, personally, of course, it'd be something you'd want to study. I think the same kind of psychological mechanism would be triggered if the checkboxes were in an online form, or the text entry box that I suggested adding like a line to the bottom of the reply card. The same thing would hold. In the laboratory studies that I cited, they had lots of different ways of triggering agentic appeals, either checkboxes or open text entry where you could write whatever you wanted, and many of those were on computers. So I think probably would work in a similar way. Yeah.
I think you addressed this at the end of your first answer, but trying looking at this and saying, if somebody's in the super rich 1%, they're given to this annual fund, but they're also in conversation with John Lewis about a mega gift to fund a professorship that is completely personalized. So my speculation is, why are the super rich giving before those studies at a slightly lower level? But there's a huge
Yeah.
scale difference in the mentality about giving to this versus the personal conversations they're having with John about making.
So I think that's a great question. One thing to point out is that the Penn Fund, we have a great relationship with the Penn Fund. They're not so keen on us doing interventions on the people that they've already targeted to be the mega donors. So they're worried about that, like you might be. And so the rich in this group are people who we identify as that we might be helping them suss out who the people should be in the next wave of appeals. But yeah, they're not letting us mess with those folks right now. Yeah.
Did you see any difference in giving in response to the agentic appeal between those who actually checked boxes and those
Yeah, so that's something that we're working. This is relatively new data. So some of these questions, yeah. So we're going to have to try to investigate that because that's a much more difficult manual coding process. So it takes a little while longer. But yeah, I think the one of the things that we think the effect might still work even if what happens is the person either checks a box or writes something or just starts to think about the fact that the Penn Fund cares about what their what it is that they care about, that all of those things might trigger the effect. And so it's an interesting question of will the effect be stronger among people who actually take that opportunity to do the checkbox. The difficulty is we don't know in the control group who are the folks that if given the agentic appeal would have checked the box or written something. And so it's hard to do an apples to apples comparison on that, but it's definitely worth exploring. Yeah. Yeah, so I said this briefly, but yeah, so again, it's one of these things where directionally there was, but it wasn't significant. So we sort of say, okay, we think the main effect of this intervention was to get people to donate more money if they were going to make a donation. We're not optimistic. We're not confident to say something like it increased the donation rate, although it's the donation rates were quite small, so it's you need a big bump to really see something. But yeah, there was a small but non-significant increase in donation rates. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Control question first, and then we'll come back down here. Good question. Let me think. So the giving controls that we added certainly included the proportion who had given in the past. I don't remember if we included that. That would be a useful control. The nice thing about the big campaign and the randomization is that we're not systematically worried about those things, but it would be a nice check to make sure that even with average donations, we still see the control in place.
So my comment was to be cautious about the interpretation of the results, given that it's a collective good that's being supported. So if someone receives the treatment, they are inferring that other donors are receiving the same treatment and maybe reacting in part to that.
So that's an interesting hypothesis. So if you think that I see the appeal, if I know the effect is going to be positive, so I feel like I'm going to respond to this by giving more, and I think other people might respond to it by giving more. My intuition would be that would work against us finding something so large for the 1%, because they might think, oh, I don't have to give as much. Other people are going to be affected by this appeal. Maybe I don't have to respond as much. But there might be other.
There's a lot out there, including some work by Jim on leadership gifts, that I wouldn't automatically make that assumption.
Okay. No, that's fair. I skipped over you a couple times. So I have the cane here getting pulled, but I will say this: we wanted to try. This is a very subtle. It was an intervention that was chosen both because we thought it was subtle, and if we found something, we'd be quite pleased. It was also much easier for the Penn Fund to do. They were hesitant to have to deal with lots of logistics surrounding earmarked donations. But my sense is that if it works for something as subtle as just giving the person the opportunity to voice what they value, then it probably would work even better if you gave them not just a sense of control, but real control over where the dollars go. Thank you very much.